I do think Tulsa's a beautiful, oh, here we are. We're live. I want to welcome you to this session of Overheard. Overheard is a series of conversations that we're having about faith and life. I'm the lead pastor at Harvard Avenue Christian Church. And during this Lenten season, we've been talking about a different kind of fast, giving up things like bitterness, chatter, resentment, anger, things like that. And today we're going to be talking about negativity. And so it's my pleasure, my honor today to welcome you, Dr. Deborah Gist, to Overheard with us tonight. I know a lot of people at our church and in our community are so anxious to hear from you, and we're so grateful that you're willing to give us your time this evening. Tonight, we're going to have an opportunity for you to ask questions, and please just send your questions in. We'll do our best to answer them and let Deborah answer those questions. We're going to talk about negativity. And you've had an incredible career. It's been great reading about you and all the things you've been able to accomplish as a reformer, a teacher, administrator, superintendent of schools. You came here from Rhode Island, where you were the state education commissioner. Mm-hmm. How long were you in Rhode Island?
6 years.
And then you came here in 2015 to become the superintendent of schools?
Yes.
So what made you decide to want to return back to Tulsa?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy. And I want to thank you also for your kind words in the sermon on Sunday. It made me cry, and I just was not expecting it and really appreciated that. And I'm thrilled to be here. Harvard Avenue is such a hugely important part of my life. So it's an honor to be a part of this conversation. And it's been wonderful getting to know you. And we're so happy to have you in Tulsa and to have you.
Thank you.
Have you and Teresa in Tulsa, and to have you both at Harvard Avenue. And I never intended to leave, to be honest with you. And so it was a 30-year detour of sorts that I took. And I left Oklahoma for the same reason that a lot of educators and college graduates leave Oklahoma, which is that I was going to be able to make a living as a teacher in Texas. And sadly, that has gotten only much, much worse in the time frame since that time. But so we have not only not solved that problem, we've exacerbated that problem as a state. But that's why I left, and I didn't think it would be forever, and it wasn't, but it was certainly a lot longer than I could have ever imagined at that time.
Well, I know your parents are glad that you're back, and our church is certainly glad that you're back here. And I know that Tulsa's better because you're here. And, it's really easy. I know you have a very difficult job, a demanding job, one of the most demanding jobs I could ever imagine. But our church wants to know that we're here for you. We're cheerleading for you, and that we pray for you. I appreciate, my daughter is a kindergarten school teacher. It's been a difficult year. And so I just appreciate, the work that you do. You mentioned something. I want to ask you a question about it. You said that you started out as a teacher. What is different today for a teacher today that is more challenging than perhaps 20 or 30 years ago? What challenges are they facing today? What hardships that maybe they weren't facing 20 or 30 years ago?
Oh, everything is more difficult. We have a lot of educators in our congregation, and we have amazing teachers and other team members, school leaders, teacher assistants, bus drivers. There's so many people that make up what we do as a school system. And it is so much harder today, and it was already hard. It is a huge undertaking, and teaching is really, it's a lifestyle. It's not only not just a job or a career, it's really a lifestyle. Everything you are and who you are, you pour your life into your work. I imagine similarly to someone in your line of work as a pastor. Yeah. But what's more challenging about it today is not only the fact that the expectations have changed, and the way in which the federal government and the state government and school districts put expectations on people who are teachers and do the work that we do in our schools, but it's also that we have as a society, we have made it more difficult. We see, because of the increase of childhood poverty, the trauma that we see going on, the needs that our children have are so much different and greater. And that changes everything. And we don't do enough as a community. We don't do enough as a system to provide that support. And so too often it falls on the shoulders of classroom teachers, and it really shouldn't. We have to do a better job of providing those wraparound supports.
I didn't intend to mention this, but I've always believed as a Christian and as a pastor that it is a moral obligation of the church to support our public schools. And what has always bothered me has been the exodus of Christian people from public schools to private schools and schools that they've started themselves. And I'm not faulting that, because we want to do the best we can for our kids. But what ends up happening is that when churches and Christians leave the public school system, it doesn't allow us to pour that support into it. And it also is denigrating to our public school teachers sometimes, I think. And so I just feel like it's important for Harvard Avenue Christian Church in the future now and forever to support the work you do, our schools do, and pour love on our teachers, because it is a difficult and underfunded, underappreciated position. I imagine this last year has been even harder on teachers, receiving criticism and complaint. You think that's so? Has that been so?
No question. Some people believe that they've, for those of us in Tulsa Public Schools, since we were on distance learning, people believe that, they were just like sitting around eating bonbons or something. And the opposite was true. I mean, their workload, they're having to completely learn how they do what they do. Everything was exacerbated. It's been an incredibly difficult year for everyone. Although differently for different people, to be clear. For our families, for example, so many of them serving on the front lines throughout this entire experience, so many of them losing their jobs because of the economic crisis that went along with the public health crisis. And so it's been just a really, really tough year for everyone in different ways.
As a leader, how have you, as the leader of our school system, how have you poured love and how have you chosen to motivate and help our teachers stay positive? What have you seen as your role in building up your team?
Our team is everything. We call it Team Tulsa, and it matters so much that even though we have about 6,000 employees, that we see ourselves as one team on a mission to serve Tulsa and the students and their families in our school system. And those teams, it's a team of teams. So we have all kinds of different teams within the big team of Team Tulsa. We have school teams, we have the team of our bus drivers, the team of our custodians. We have all these different teams within the team, but somehow we come together, and that's really my responsibility. In so many ways, is to support leaders throughout the organization in every different kind of role, and also to set tone and expectation around who are we as a big team. What are we about? What do we believe in? And what are we trying to accomplish together? And then obviously the team of our school board, who are the elected officials who are they're my boss, and they're ultimately responsible for the district as a whole. So there's a lot going on with all those different teams and with the organization as a whole.
I have a question that's about that, is that you have a history of being a reformer. And, I've read about the work that you did in Rhode Island, and you came here, and it's been a different type of role, I understand. How are you able to balance your work as a reformer with at the same time as a role as an encourager? Or you seem to possess this gift of candor, but at the same time, compassion. How are you able to harness those two things at the same time? That seems like a real skill to me.
Well, so for one thing, I've never really embraced that description
As
as
a reformer?
I do believe that I am someone who wants the system to change for the better for kids for sure, but
Yeah.
also for our team. And I think back, my years as a teacher, how too often the system was actually, serving as a barrier to me, making it harder for me to do what I was trying to do for my students and not easier. And so those early experiences were very formative for me and instructional for me.
Hmm.
I think that there's no question that we have to do school differently. And so I would think of that more as like transformation,
Hmm.
reform. It's like we have to stop trying to do school the way that school was designed, more than 100 years ago, for a different time, a different um, world, a different way of communicating, everything has changed. But in a lot of ways, school still looks a lot like it did when you and I were in school,
Yeah.
and even my parents were in school. And while we've come a long way, and that's not entirely true, a lot of things, really are the same. And it's not about just blowing things up for the sake of blowing them up, but it's about like saying, okay, we have to think about this differently, because our kids need to leave our schools ready for a world that's very different from the one that we're in now, and certainly will be in the 10 to 13 years that they leave our schools. So we have to do it differently, and we can't keep, as I was saying earlier, expecting our teachers and other team members to do more and more and more with less and less. And that's particularly true here in Oklahoma.
I think it's a real gift to be able to have that courage and candor at the same time with compassion. And, I've admired your willingness to speak truth in situations when you feel like teachers and so on are being bullied. And I just appreciate your honesty and candor as a leader. It's very refreshing to me.
Well, I'm so glad you saw it that way, because people will say, well, why did, you're obviously talking about my comments about the governor. And a lot of people would say, well, why would you, you're just making it worse. You're just, you're sort of, why would you do that? Well, it's important for people to know that that was after many, many weeks of time and time and time again, talking about Tulsa, 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 Tulsa. We were not the only district that was in distance learning. When he first started talking about us, we actually were already moving our students back to in-person learning. But I felt like it was a necessary defense of our team here, and to put a stop to this sort of constant focus. And a lot of people don't realize some things that were going on that weren't private, they were very public. And one example is in the State of the State address, he actually gave the members of the media this bingo card thing for them to fill out about some of the stuff he was going to talk about. And Tulsa was on it. Tulsa was on there as a bingo card, like this was some kind of a game. And here we are in a life and death, literally a life and death situation, with team members and parents just trying to get by, working so hard. And so I do think, to this topic about negativity,
Yeah.
how do you, do you, when I responded to that, like, is that taking negativity and being negative, or is it calling it what it is? I don't know. I still wonder about that response, but that was the reason that I did it. This is a moment where it has always been true in roles like mine, and perhaps for everyone, that you can't make everyone happy. I'm sure you experienced that as leading a congregation and a team. But in this year, what's different is that you can't make anyone happy. Like, there is no decision that we could or have made where you're going to make people feel the way they want to feel, because this is just a really awful time.
Yeah.
It's just
The,
really hard.
the reason I brought that up wasn't necessarily to throw blame or shame anywhere on anybody politically, was to say that what I saw from you was someone standing up for her team, someone fighting for your team, regardless of what the outside threat was or not, was people who work with us want to know that we're there for them. And our teachers need people to stand up for them. And it's admirable and inspirational to see someone to be willing to sacrifice their own self for the benefit of saying, hey, pay attention to our teachers, our school. We're doing the best we can here. And I just think that we can't say enough. We can't say thank you enough to our teachers and for the commitment of our teachers in this season who don't get enough thanks and praise for the work. And having a daughter who teaches kindergarten, I see it firsthand. I see that sign in her front yard that says, support your local school, support your teachers. So this negativity thing, you have a very public job, and people publicly criticize you don't know your heart. You get criticism. How do you stay positive in the midst of all this, the negative world we live in? How do you stay positive?
Well, a few different things. So first of all, I feel like I was kind of built that way.
Yeah.
So that's helpful. But I also believe very much that I have been called to do the work I do. And my motto in life is, to this you are called, go forth and be worthy of that calling. And so that is everything that centers me, is who I am and what I believe in and what I'm trying to accomplish while I'm on this planet. So the hardest thing is when people question not just your decisions or, agreeing or disagreeing with that, because that's actually helpful feedback. But more when they accuse you of things that are about like your values or like your intent. That is the hardest thing for me, is that not only do I disagree with you, I'm also going to decide that because you did something I didn't like, that you therefore are, someone who you're not. That's the hardest thing. I think the thing that I always try to think about is, so a lot of times people will say to me, oh, in that job, you must have really thick skin. I actually don't. I reject that description.
Yeah.
I actually believe it's important to feel people's anger, to feel their pain, to listen to it, to hear it, and to listen underneath and what they're trying to say, what they're trying to do. Most of the time, it's virtually every time, it's someone who has a message. They have a problem, they have a need, they have a fear or a frustration or something that is going on. And we need to hear that. We need to listen to it, understand it, try to help them solve that problem. And, while it's true that isn't, that sometimes there are just folks who, are just, negative to be negative, almost every time that's not the case. They are a parent who's in pain, a teacher who's frustrated, whatever that might. So that's the way I try to think about it.
Do you find that I really appreciate that. That's very helpful to me, because it's really easy to just hear the complaint and to not, or the anger or the frustration, and to not hear what's behind it. And when you hear what's behind it, it really helps you to have empathy and compassion for the person that's speaking. And I've learned it, if you can let go of yourself and stop and not be defensive and just listen, it allows you to respond with compassion to someone you otherwise might be angry or negative toward. Do you find that when you do that it often changes the conversation with the person that you're speaking to?
Oh, definitely. People want to be heard. They want to know that you care about what's going on. And so often, not always, but so often, that will immediately sort of diffuse. And then you can get to the part of where you're needing to do the work. What is it that's the issue that's going on, and how do we address it? Or how do I make sure that I'm hearing the feedback that you're sharing? So there's no question that it changes the situation. As a leader, as I was saying earlier when we were talking about the team, you set tone. And you talked about this in the sermon, actually, about uh, about negativity being infectious
Yeah.
and being a super spreader, and that is so true right now. And social media has a lot of great things, but it absolutely contributes to that super spreader of negativity. As a leader, you set tone, and so I try so hard to make sure that as I'm entering a space, that I'm, making sure that I'm trying to bring um, positive energy, and not a false sense
Yeah.
of. You have to be. You can't just be like Pollyanna or anything like that. And these are
Mm.
serious times and serious
Yeah.
stuff. But there's a part of the way that you enter a space and start your engagement with folks that makes a difference. There was a book that was given to me by an amazing woman named Mary Beth Fafford in Rhode Island years ago, called "To Pause at the Threshold." And it
Mm.
talks about thresholds being this sort of ancient, they have this meaning, and in a lot of different cultures that
Mm.
it has meaning. And so the takeaway for me in that book is to pause at that threshold. And I taught myself to stop and sort of put my hand on the door jamb as I'm walking in, say a quick little prayer.
Wow.
Is, particularly if it's likely to be a difficult engagement, but even if not, that there's something that you're bringing into that space that's important to fix yourself and ready yourself for that moment.
Mm. One of the things that one of the things I've read about conflict, difficulty, hardship is getting up in the balcony. Have you heard this? Standing in the balcony and looking down. I forgot. I think it's Heifetz.
Yeah.
Heifetz. Yeah. Adaptive change. And
Yeah.
I have found that I try to, like you said, I mean, I want to just pause, breathe, and try to get above it, and just to see what's happening around the room before I respond, just to be able to pay attention, just to be able to listen. But I really appreciate you saying, put your hand on the threshold of the door before you enter the room, and to say a brief prayer so that you could be at your best, so you could truly listen. That seems to me to be a very doable for anybody in any situation, entering someone's home, entering any kind of conversation, to just pause and pray and ask that you can truly be present to whatever that person's, feeling at the moment. So how does your faith feed your heart and soul for the work that you do for your work? Talk to us a little bit about your faith and how that feeds your calling.
Oh, well, it's everything. As I said, I mean, I do believe that, and I can see the through line of the way in which my career, different experiences I have had have prepared me for the work I'm doing now. I don't I don't know that anything could have prepared us for this particular year, but generally speaking, the things that I have experienced as a teacher and in the different roles I've had, and then also I believe that, that not only does like God put people in our path, but we also teach ourselves to use and learn from the people that are people we meet along the road, so to speak. And so for me, it's really about, what am I trying to accomplish while I'm having this experience as a human being on planet Earth? And what do I want to leave? When I was an elder, I used this poem once in one of the things I was doing. That's how's it go? It says, God has no hands on earth but yours. That the work we do, we strive to ensure that we are doing things that help us to attempt to bring greater justice, greater love, greater positivity to the world while we're here. And for me, it's about trying to leave a legacy of change that will ensure that we have education systems that do a better job of giving the right experience for the adults in the system, but most importantly, have a great experience for children who go to our school.
Do you think that, do you think that this sense of calling that you have is what gives you the fuel and the strength to bear up under the difficulty and to have endurance and resilience?
Oh, no question about that. No question about that. Another saying that I love is like, be the kind of person that every morning when you wake up and your feet hit the floor, the devil says, "Oh shit, she's up." I don't know if I'm saying that word on this
That's
conversation.
okay. That's okay.
Like, live your life in a way that's like, okay, here we go. We have work to do. We have, things that are before us, and they're going to be hard, but we're ready for them. And to be the kind of leader that our teachers, our students, their families, their parents, everyone deserves a public school system that is excellent. And we have a lot of challenges as an urban district, as a district that's been losing enrollment. We have about 80% of our students in Tulsa qualify for free and reduced lunch.
Wow.
And there's significant need in our community. And like I said, so many of those needs fall on the shoulders of our school teams. We have a lot of work that we need to do.
Let me ask you a question. Somebody just sent me a question. What would you want to do if you weren't doing this work?
Wow.
Great question, isn't it?
It is a really good question, and it's not going to be the answer that you might expect, but the other career that I would have had would to be a herpetologist.
A herpetologist?
Herpetologist. So
what is a remind me.
Reptiles and amphibians.
Really?
Yeah.
That is really interesting. So if you were to offer a lesson to students about negativity and its effects, what might it look like?
I don't know. That's a good question. Well, I would want to start with a high quality text.
Yeah.
That's kind of how we do things. So I'd want like a really great book or a poem or an essay or a historical document or something like that. And then, get the students to talking about it. So one example might be, oh gosh, I have this somewhere around here probably, but Teddy Roosevelt, there's this whole story where they're out on some kind of they're out in the wilderness somewhere, and there's it'd been raining for days and days and days, and there was all this mud and muck, and everybody's miserable. And I mean, it's just this horrible conditions. And he says, and the quote is, he says, "By Godfrey's, isn't this fun?" So maybe some kind of a historical reference like that or something, and then talk about what is it about, the choices that we make about how we're going to experience the world, and the fact that we don't control our environment, we don't control other people, but we do control how we respond to other people. We do control how we react to the circumstances that we encounter. So in the sermon on Sunday, you were talking about the author. I forget his name, but I wrote the book down. The Joy Energy Bus.
Energy Bus.
Yeah,
Energy Bus. John Gordon.
Right? Yeah. That he's having this moment where it's the car doesn't start, or this happens and this happens, and it's how do you handle those moments? You have a choice about how you handle them. You don't have a choice about whether it happens or not.
It's an interesting book because he's used that book. Some school superintendents and principals have used that book to build a healthy, positive team for their school. It's it's not a great book. It's an okay book. It's a simple book. A lot of the things that you've been talking about positivity, how you lead a team, cast and create a vision that brings the team together. It's about building a healthy, vibrant team that makes a lasting impact. And it's about his life. It's an interesting It is an interesting book. Let me ask you, I want to go back to something you said earlier about not being fake or Pollyanna. So being positive, this is me talking out loud about this, being positive does not mean, and not being negative does not mean that we can't show our hurt or disappointment or discouragement. So you can, just because you show hurt, discouragement, pain, or suffering doesn't mean you're being negative. It's just a part of being a human being. A lot of what's happened last year has been really hard and tough. How do you make space for that in your work? When do you find it appropriate to say, I'm hurting, this is hard? Do you find that important in your work to be able to show empathy for others by showing, hey, I'm hurting, this is hard? How do you do that?
Absolutely. And I would describe it as being willing to show that you're vulnerable, that you're human, that you make mistakes, and that you own your mistakes, but also that, that being, like you said, being positive doesn't mean that you're just like, crazy happy all the time. I mean, that would be annoying probably if someone was that way. It just wouldn't come across as genuine. And I think that, for me, it's talking about coping mechanisms and making sure that we are supporting others and how to handle difficult times and modeling that. I talk about pretty regularly, prayer and meditation. And I talk about, for me, it might be prayer. For someone else, it may or may not be prayer, but taking moments to reflect, to pause, to quiet. And so I think that in doing that, you're demonstrating that it just doesn't happen by accident, that it happens because we have to be, that we're intentional about the way in which we enter the world, the way in which we reflect on the world, and the way in which we fix the things that we don't do well the first time.
So we're running out. I want to honor our time and your time. Know you're busy. A couple questions. So this is about our church, about Harvard Avenue, and I know we had a lot of people from church watching now. Will be watching for the next few days. When I meet with people and talk with people, most of us we've had in-person worship, but most of us haven't been able to be here. We're doing it online. And they tell me what they miss most about being in person with one another, the community, the laughter, the hugs and stuff. What do you miss most about? I know you've been a part of worship. You've been active and participating and you served as an elder during much of this. What do you miss about being in person with your church family? What have you missed about that?
Well, I would agree. I think that as human beings, we're sort of wired for relationship. And even when we are in person these days, we're all masked up. And there's something that while it's doable, it changes the dynamic. And there's an awkwardness. I'm a people person. I'm a hugger. And I think so. There's no question that part of what I miss about being in church in person is that relationship component. There are people at Harvard Avenue who've known me since I was a little bitty girl, since I've gone to Harvard Avenue since I was a little bitty girl. And those are relationships that are just like hugely valuable. But I also think that while it's been wonderful to be able to experience the message and the sermon and the rest of the the church service online, and the team has done an incredible job of making that happen. I do think that there's something about being there in person. And I think even listening to your sermons, when you have some people, when I'm watching it online and you have some people in the audience, I think it changes the way that I experience it. It seems to change the way that you experience it. And so there's just something about being in person when it's happening, that you're feeling the tone in the room, you're sensing what others are experiencing as well, the laughter, and then of course the music and singing and lifting up your voice with your your friends and fellow churchgoers there at Harvard Avenue, lifting our voices together in song and praise. And I miss that very much too.
That's well, thank you. So final, just brief question. So Sunday, I call you and say, I can't be there. Deborah, I need you to preach the sermon. And so at the last minute, and you just want to get up in front of the congregation, and you would just like to just, give a brief message of encouragement to the church, just brief. What would you want to say to your church family at this time in our world? And what would you want to share? What do you want to share with your heart to your church family tonight? What would you share?
I think the message that we all are craving right now is maybe something around like tenacity, that we and what we're going to do to continue getting through this really huge, difficult time, but also to recognize that, that for some people, this is not the most difficult thing they've ever gone through. People have had really hard things, and we will have hard things happen again. So what are we learning about that, and how to get through it, and to get through it without losing ourselves, without losing relationships, but actually get through it in a way that we're growing and getting stronger and better as we go through it. I don't know, maybe something like that.
I think that's great. So I tell you, I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been terrific. I want to honor your time. I know I'm going to go back and watch this conversation again, because several things you've said have meant a lot to me, and I know mean a lot to others. There's been a lot of great stuff here tonight. So thank you. Much thanks to you. Say hello to Ronnie.
Okay.
And we're praying for you every day, and you have all our love and support. We appreciate you. Thank you, Deborah, and good night.
I'm so grateful for Harvard Avenue, and I sometimes get notes from people in the congregation. I keep them. They mean so much to me. I'm just so grateful for that. I love Harvard Avenue. We're so happy to have you, and I cannot wait for us to all be back together again in person.
Thank you.
Thank you for this conversation.
You bet.